Jim Jones is lucky to be alive right now. I'm not exaggerating. What went down at Fort Lauderdale Airport wasn't just some celebrity altercation. This was a full-blown ambush that turned an escalator into a literal war zone. Two men allegedly stalked him from the plane, waited for the perfect moment, and then attacked him in front of everybody. A 94-year-old man ended up in the hospital. Blood was spilled, pepper spray rumors are flying, and somehow Jim Jones walked away with no charges while his attackers disappeared into thin air. The internet is spinning because none of this makes sense until you hear what really happened. Now, everybody felt they knew the full story about this Fort Lauderdale Airport incident. The headlines were calling it a fight or an altercation. Social media was clipping the TMZ footage and saying Jim Jones got into some drama on an escalator. That was the version everyone was repeating. Just another celebrity caught up in airport beef, right? But now that the full details are coming out, the whole narrative is twisting. This wasn't two people bumping into each other and losing their cool. According to multiple witnesses and the actual police investigation, Jim Jones was hunted. These two men allegedly had their eyes on him the second he stepped on that plane, and they were waiting for the exact moment to strike. What everyone saw as a random fight was actually a calculated attack that went horribly, violently wrong. Let me break down what actually happened, because the TMZ footage only shows you a fraction of the chaos. According to witness reports and the leaked details from the police investigation, the situation started way before that escalator. Insiders claim these two men were already eyeing Jim Jones during the boarding process. They weren't just passengers minding their business. They were allegedly whispering to each other, pointing and acting confrontational from the jump. Something happened on the plane itself. Reports say there was a shove, some kind of physical contact that set everything off. But here's the thing. Jones didn't escalate it there. He kept his cool, probably thinking it was over. But these dudes? They weren't done. They allegedly followed him off the plane, through the terminal, stalking him like they had a mission to complete. And that's when they struck. The escalator became the battleground. And honestly, it was the worst possible place for this to go down. Think about it. You're on a moving staircase, gravity's pulling you down, there's metal everywhere, and you're trapped in a narrow space with nowhere to go. Witnesses say the two men launched themselves at Jim Jones the moment they were all on an escalator together. This wasn't an argument that got heated. This was an attack. The TMZ footage shows absolute chaos, fists flying, bodies slamming into the metal sides. He was screaming and scrambling to get out of the way. And Jim Jones, he didn't just stand there and take it. He fought back with everything he had. This was a man fighting for survival, not trying to win some ego battle. He unleashed hell because he was cornered, provoked, and had no choice but to defend himself. Now, here's where it gets even crazier. One of the attackers ended up bleeding from the head. I'm talking serious injury. Dude was staggering around and he just walked out of a disaster zone. And in the middle of all this madness, a 94-year-old bystander got caught in the crossfire. A 94-year-old man just trying to get through the airport, and he ends up pulled into the violent eruption like a civilian trapped in a street riot. He had to be taken to the hospital, shaken and injured. That's how out of control this situation became. Fans online turned into full-blown investigators after the footage dropped. They started slowing down frames, zooming on body language, tracking who threw the first punch, analyzing the angles, and what everyone keeps pointing out is this. Jim Jones was backed into a corner. The attackers were the aggressors. They came at him. They cornered him on that escalator, and he defended himself. But here's the most shocking twist in all of this. When police reviewed the full footage, not just the viral clips, but everything captured by airport security cameras, they didn't see Jim Jones as the aggressor. They saw exactly what witnesses reported. A man who was pushed, provoked, cornered, and forced to fight back. And that's why there were no charges. Jim Jones walked away free, bruised but unbroken, while the two men who attacked him just disappeared. No charges on them either have been publicly confirmed, but they vanished from the narrative completely. Now let's get into the motive, because this is where everything starts clicking into place. Why would two random men target Jim Jones at an airport? What would make someone plan out an attack like this, stalk him through a terminal, and then assault him on an escalator in front of hundreds of witnesses? Here's what we know about Jim Jones. The man is a legend in hip-hop. He's been in the game for decades, part of Dipset, built a name for himself, and commands respect in the industry. But that level of fame, it also comes with enemies. People who feel disrespected, people who have old beefs, people who see an opportunity to make a name for themselves by stepping to a celebrity. Some insiders are speculating that this confrontation may have started long before the flight itself. There are rumors, and these are unconfirmed, so take it with a grain of salt, that the two men had been trying to get Jones' attention for a while. Maybe they felt slighted by him in the past. Maybe they were clout chasing and wanted to provoke a reaction they could film and post online. Maybe it was personal beef that had been simmering for months or even years. What's wild is that airport confrontations like this don't just happen out of nowhere. Think about it. You have to book a flight, go through security, board a plane, and then follow someone through a terminal. That takes planning. That takes intent. These dudes weren't randomly bumping into Jim Jones and losing their temper. They knew he was going to be there. They knew they wanted confrontation. And they picked the escalator because it trapped everyone in a confined, moving space where there was no escape. Reports from witnesses say that the attacker who ended up bleeding kept provoking Jones even after the initial confrontation. Like, even after getting rocked, this dude was still talking crazy, almost daring Jim to react again. That's not normal behavior. That's someone who either wanted to be a martyr for some cause or is so consumed by rage and ego that he couldn't let it go even when he was clearly outmatched. And here's another layer to this. Jim Jones's calm response afterward reportedly shocked even airport staff. Despite the chaos, despite the violence, despite the blood and the injured elderly man and the screaming crowd, Jones kept his composure. He addressed his fans later with this chilling calmness, saying, "I'm all right. Give me a second. I'll be right with y'all." That's not the response of someone who was trying to start trouble. That's the response of someone who's been through far worse battles than this and knows how to carry himself when things go sideways. On social media, he doubled down with a cold warning to anyone else who might be thinking about running up on him. They got what they were looking for. Translation? You come at me, you better be ready for what happens next. But here's the part that really hits different, and honestly, this is what makes this whole situation so much darker than just another celebrity beef story. The person who got caught up in the middle of all this chaos was a 94-year-old man. Let that sink in for a second. A 94-year-old man. This man wasn't involved in any beef. He didn't know Jim Jones. He didn't know the attackers. He was just trying to get through the airport, probably on his way to visit family or heading home after a trip. And he ended up in a terrifying, violent situation because two men decided to ambush a celebrity on an escalator. The leaked footage and witness accounts describe this elderly man being pulled into the chaos as bodies collided on that moving staircase. Imagine being 94 years old, trying to navigate an airport escalator, which is already a bit tricky at that age, and suddenly you're surrounded by three men throwing punches, slamming into the rails, blood flying. That's traumatic. That's dangerous. And he was injured badly enough that he had to be taken to the hospital. That's somebody's grandfather. That's somebody's father. That's a man who's lived 94 years on this earth and ended up hospitalized because of a situation he had absolutely nothing to do with. The emotional weight of that is heavy. His family is probably dealing with trauma, wondering why their loved one had to go through something so violent and senseless. And honestly, that injury to the elderly bystander is probably one of the biggest reasons this whole situation got taken so seriously by police. When innocent people get hurt, especially vulnerable elderly people, that changes the entire investigation. It's no longer just about two parties having a conflict, it's about public safety, reckless endangerment, and the fact that this confrontation put other lives at risk. Jim Jones himself hasn't publicly addressed the elderly victim specifically, but those close to him say he was genuinely shaken up about it. Not about the fight itself, he handled that, but about the fact that someone innocent got hurt. That's the kind of collateral damage that weighs on you, even when you're not the one who started the situation. And let's keep it real for a second. The attackers, they don't seem to care. There's been no public apology, no statement, no acknowledgement of the harm they caused. They provoked a violent situation in a crowded public space, injured an elderly man, got themselves bloodied and bruised, and then just disappeared. That tells you everything you need to know about their character and their intentions. Now let's go even deeper into the evidence and the investigation, because there are layers to this that make the whole story even more insane. When police reviewed the airport security footage, and we're talking multiple camera angles from different parts of the terminal, they were able to piece together a timeline that completely exonerated Jim Jones. First, they saw the two men eyeing Jones during the boarding process. Security cameras caught them watching him, talking to each other, pointing. That's premeditation right there. They identified their target before anyone even got on the plane. Then, cameras inside the plane allegedly captured the initial confrontation, the shove that witnesses reported. And what's critical here is that Jones didn't retaliate on the plane. He de-escalated. He walked away. That's huge for his legal defense because it shows restraint and an attempt to avoid further conflict. But the attackers didn't let it go. Terminal cameras tracked them following Jones through the airport. They weren't just walking in the same direction by coincidence. They were deliberately staying close, keeping him in sight, waiting for an opportunity. And they found it on the escalator. Now, here's something that a lot of people don't realize about the pepper spray rumors. The original headline mentioned Jim Jones being pepper sprayed and humiliated. But there's literally no evidence of that in the police report or the footage. No mention of pepper spray, no mention of Jones being incapacitated or humiliated. In fact, the opposite happened. He defended himself successfully, stood his ground, and walked away on his own 2 feet, while his attackers were left injured and bleeding. So where did that pepper spray rumor come from? Probably from early inaccurate reports or social media speculation. And that's what makes this whole story such a perfect example of how narratives get twisted online. The headline wanted to paint Jim Jones as a victim who got embarrassed, but the reality is that he was the one who came out on top. Fans online have been working like full-blown investigators, comparing his social media posts from before and after the incident, analyzing his tone, looking for any signs of trauma or fear. And what did they find? Nothing. Jim Jones posted like nothing happened, addressed it calmly, and moved on with his life. That's not the behavior of someone who got humiliated. That's the behavior of someone who handled business and isn't dwelling on it. Meanwhile, the two attackers, completely silent. No statements, no social media posts, no interviews. They either got lawyers who told them to shut up, or they realized they bit off way more than they could chew and decided to disappear from the public eye. Either way, their silence speaks volumes. And let's talk about the legal side for a second. The fact that no charges were filed against Jim Jones is massive. Police don't just let celebrities walk away from violent altercations because of their fame. They reviewed the evidence, interviewed witnesses, watched the footage, and concluded that Jones acted in self-defense. That's a legal determination based on facts, not feelings or celebrity status. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Reports say that the two attackers could potentially face charges themselves, not just for assault, but for reckless endangerment because of the elderly man who got injured. If prosecutors decide to pursue that angle, these dudes could be looking at serious legal consequences. And if that happens, this whole story is going to blow up all over again. The internet's reaction to this whole situation has been absolutely wild, and it really shows you how divided people are when it comes to celebrity confrontations and street justice. On one side, you've got people praising Jim Jones for standing his ground and defending himself. They're saying he did exactly what he had to do when two men ambushed him, and they respect him for not backing down. On the other hand, you've got people questioning why the situation escalated so violently in the first place. They're asking if there was a way to de-escalate, if security could have intervened sooner, if the whole thing could have been avoided. And honestly, those are fair questions, even if the answers aren't simple. But what's really interesting is how this incident has sparked a broader conversation about celebrity safety and the dangers of public confrontations in the social media age. Because let's be real, situations like this are happening more and more. Celebrities can't move through the world normally anymore. There's always someone with a camera, someone looking for clout, someone with old beef who sees an opportunity to make a moment go viral. Jim Jones himself has talked about this in the past. He's mentioned how being in the public eye means that you're constantly at risk of being tested, provoked, or challenged by people who want to make a name for themselves. And airports, they're the worst. You're trapped at confined space, surrounded by strangers, going through stressful security processes, and everyone's got their phone out ready to record. What happened in Fort Lauderdale is an extreme example, but it's part of a larger pattern. Think about how many videos we've seen of celebrities getting approached aggressively in airports, restaurants, or on the street. Think about how many of those situations could have turned violent if circumstances were slightly different. This incident is a wake-up call about how dangerous that environment can be. And here's another angle that people are discussing online: the responsibility of bystanders at airport security. Where were the security guards when these two men were following Jim Jones through the terminal? Why didn't anyone intervene before it got to the point of violence on an escalator? Why did it take a full-blown fight breaking out before anyone stepped in to help? Those are uncomfortable questions that they need to be asked. Because if security had been paying attention, if someone had noticed the threatening behavior and intervened earlier, maybe that elderly man doesn't end up in the hospital. Maybe the whole situation gets de-escalated before it turns into a viral video. Maybe everyone goes home safe. But that's not what happened. And now we're left analyzing footage of a violent airport confrontation, trying to figure out how things went so wrong. Social media has also been flooded with theories about why this happened. Some people think it was a setup, that someone paid those two men to attack Jim Jones for some kind of larger beef or revenge plot. Others think it was just random clout chasers who wanted to say they fought a celebrity. Some folks are even speculating that it could be related to old Dipset beef, people from the past coming back around to settle scores. Honestly, we don't know the full motive yet. The attackers haven't spoken publicly, and Jim Jones hasn't given details beyond confirming that he defended himself. Until one of them decides to tell their side of the story, we're all just speculating based on the footage and witness accounts. But what we do know is that this situation could have ended tragically. People could have died on that escalator. The elderly man could have had a heart attack or fallen the wrong way. Jim Jones could have been seriously injured if those attackers had weapons. The fact that everyone survived and there were no deaths is honestly a miracle given how violent things got. And this story is still unfolding with way bigger implications than just one airport incident. What we're seeing here is a dangerous intersection of celebrity culture, social media, clout chasing, and real-world violence. It's not just Jim Jones. It's what happens when the digital world and the physical world collide, and people are willing to risk everything, their freedom, their safety, other people's lives, for a viral moment. The bigger conversation we need to have is about responsibility. If you are someone with a large following, someone who's known in the streets or in the industry, how do you navigate public spaces safely? What's your responsibility when someone approaches you aggressively? Do you walk away and risk looking weak? Do you stand your ground and risk violence? Do you rely on security? And if so, how much security is enough? Jim Jones chose to defend himself, and legally he was within his rights. But emotionally, mentally, physically, there's a cost to that. Even when you win a fight, even when you're legally cleared, you still have to live with the trauma of being attacked, the guilt of someone innocent getting hurt, the stress of knowing it could happen again at any time. And for the attackers, what were they thinking? Did they really believe they were going to jump a well-known rapper in a crowded airport and face no consequences? Did they think they'd get street cred or internet fame? Because what they actually got was injuries, potential criminal charges, and their faces all over the internet associated with a failed attack. That's the reality of trying to test someone in 2025. Everything is recorded, everything goes viral, and the consequences are real. This incident is also a warning for anybody with any level of fame or public presence. The more visible you are, the more you become a target. The more you move through the world, the more you risk running into someone who has a problem with you or wants to create a problem for clout. And when that happens, you have to be prepared mentally, physically, legally to handle it. Jim Jones was prepared. He's been in the game long enough to know how to move, how to defend himself, and how to handle the aftermath. But not everyone has that experience. Not every celebrity or public figure knows how to navigate a situation like that.
So where does this leave us? Jim Jones walked away from Fort Lauderdale Airport with no charges, his reputation intact, and a message sent to anyone thinking about testing him. The two attackers disappeared into obscurity, potentially facing legal consequences, but definitely facing public humiliation. The elderly victim is hopefully recovering, though we haven't gotten updates on his condition. And the internet is left debating what really happened and what it all means. But there are still so many unanswered questions. Who were those two men? What was their real motive? Had they interacted with Jim Jones before, or was this completely random? Were they working alone, or was someone else behind this? Why did they choose that specific moment on the escalator to attack? And what happens next? Will charges be filed? Will there be lawsuits? Will more footage emerge? Jim Jones has said his piece and moved on, but the story isn't over. More details are going to come out. Maybe one of the attackers will eventually give an interview or release a statement. Maybe more witnesses will come forward with additional footage or testimony. Maybe the legal situation will develop and we'll get official charges or court documents that shed more light on what happened. And honestly, this incident raises bigger questions about what we consider acceptable behavior in public spaces, how we handle conflict in the age of smartphones and social media, and what responsibility we all have, celebrities, bystanders, security, venue operators, to prevent situations like this from happening in the first place. Because here's the thing. Everyone involved in the situation lost something. Jim Jones lost his sense of safety and peace while traveling. The attackers lost their dignity and potentially their freedom. The elderly victim lost his health and sense of security. The other bystanders lost their innocence about how quickly violence can erupt in everyday places. And we as a society lost another example of how to handle conflict peacefully. The only winners here are the people monetizing the drama. The news outlets, the social media accounts, the YouTubers, like me, let's be honest, breaking down every angle for views. But even that feels hollow when you really think about the human cost of what happened. Jim Jones is all right. He's tough, he's experienced, and he's been through worse. But not everyone who gets targeted like this will be prepared or as lucky. Not every confrontation will end without deaths. Not every elderly bystander will survive their injuries. And that's what makes this so concerning. Not just what happened, but what could happen next time.
Stay locked in because this story is about to get even crazier as more details drop. Reports say there could be additional footage from inside the plane that might show exactly what sparked the initial confrontation. There are also rumors that one of the attackers might be lawyering up and preparing to give their side of the story, which could completely change the narrative again. So drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Jim Jones did the right thing by defending himself, or should he have tried to de-escalate differently? Do you think the two attackers should face criminal charges for what they did? And what do you think should happen to make airports safer for celebrities and regular people alike? Make sure you like this video if you want to see more in-depth breakdowns like this. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single update because we're covering every twist and turn as this story develops. I appreciate you for rocking with me through this whole deep dive. And before you go, remember this. In the age of smartphones and social media, every confrontation has consequences that go way beyond the moment. Think twice before you approach someone aggressively, because everything is recorded, everything goes viral, and everything can be used in court. Whether you're famous or not, moving smart is always better than moving on impulse. I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe out there, and keep your head on a swivel when you're traveling. Peace.